This interview is being conducted for the White Lake Environmental History Project. The project is a project of the White Lake Community Library. It's collecting first-person accounts of the impact of pollution and environmental cleanup on the White Lake area community, 1940s, 1950s through the present, from local residents, visitors, businesses, and workers.
Before we start this at all, I want to thank you profusely for agreeing to do this interview, because I think we're going to really learn a lot from you, and it'll really add a lot to this project.
Would you like to know a few things that the Tannery did for Whitehall and Montague?
Yes,
they've been criticized on always because of polluting the lake.
We're here today to talk to Dexter King about his experiences on the White Lake. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Terry Hampel. I'm going to be asking him lots of questions, but there'll probably be some questions coming from Oscar too. Okay?
Okay.
So let's start kind of at the beginning. What is your experience here on White Lake?
Well, my experience on White Lake is very, very limited, because when I got out of high school, I started working at the garage with my dad, and the summertime was when we made our money. And therefore, I didn't get much chance to go down swimming and boating and so forth. So I didn't have too much to do with action in the lake. I went when I was younger. My mother used to take us down swimming in what was called Idlewild, which is just a short ways out of Whitehall. But I didn't really know much about the lake, and I didn't have much to do with it.
Okay, so but your family was here for a while before you started working in the White Lake area, right?
Oh, my family? Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. They've been here many years. I don't think my family had much to do with anything with the lake.
Well, what are your earliest memories then of being on the lake or near it?
My earliest memories of the lake is sometimes in the wintertime, Polly Morin used to take us out on the ice in his ice boat. I can remember that, and I can remember of going down and clearing the lake and going ice skating when I was in high school. In fact, my daughter, later on, she fell through the ice and almost drowned in White Lake. Yeah. And my younger daughter fell in down at the foot of Main Street when she was 3-4 years old and almost drowned. So my memories of White Lake are limited.
Was it a popular thing to swim in White Lake?
Yes.
In those days?
Oh,
It was
yeah.
okay? Nobody worried about pollution then?
No.
So interesting.
No.
Well, were you, when you were young, let's say before you started working at the Tannery, were you aware of White Lake's pollution problems?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of the pollution problems I've talked about since are false.
When did you first start hearing about pollution in the lake?
Well, I didn't hear about pollution in the lake till I started working in the Tannery.
Okay.
Then I heard complaints about people talking about Tannery polluting the lake. In fact, while I was working at the early days at the Tannery, I got a call from a lady in Montague that said she heard that we were throwing spoiled hides in the lake. And I said to her, listen, lady, we couldn't afford to throw spoiled hides in the lake because we have a hard time getting any hides. So I said, we certainly wouldn't be throwing anything away, even if it was a little bit tainted.
And talk about the economic situation of the tannery. Was the tannery always profitable?
Well, I'll tell you, the tannery was a well-run operation because the hide trimmings that they would take them off the hide when it comes into the hide house were sent to Peter Cooper for gelatin, and the shavings that we took off were sent to him for glue stock, and the hair that we took off was sold out east, used for felt hats and used for pads under rugs, and so that was profit. We couldn't afford to throw any of that stuff away.
Right. Everything was used.
It was used.
Right.
But after a while, they come out with new type of glue, and we could no longer do that with fleshing. So they were taken. Farmers took them out and plowed them under, and the hair was no longer used for felt pads under rugs. So we started burning the hair right in the vats. So then we some of our income was lost.
When the tannery closed not too long ago, what was the situation then? You know, when the tannery closed, I guess it was 20 years ago. What was the economic situation for the tannery? Were they still profiting, or was it, you know, losing so much business?
Well, I think they were still making a profit. However, having worked there as long as I did, if the people at Nashville had had any brains, they would have hired somebody that knew hides, and we would have got better hides in. Of my late years there, we were piling down too many hides that we couldn't use because they had brands on them and stuff. And if we had somebody that would go to a place like it was in Chicago for years when I first went there. Of course, they went out of the business, but when you said you wanted hides that weighed a certain weight, the hides came in very close to that weight. And of late, the guy that was buying the hides for us, if we asked him for hides that weighed 35, 40 pounds, he'd give us hides that weighed 90 pounds and some that weighed 15. Of course, the average probably was 40, but we couldn't use the two ends.
Let's kind of bump the time frame forward a little bit. Do you remember the 70s? And first you heard that the lake might be polluted? And how you heard that?
Well, I heard the lake was polluted, but as I say, when they talked about polluting, our system of effluent going into the lake was not polluting the lake because the heavy stuff settled out in the ponds, and the only thing that I will admit to is we certainly contributed to weed growth, because when we get in the hides full of manure and it was dissolved in water, we had no way of getting it out.
Mm.
That eventually ended up in the lake.
Okay, so pool up.
So if they say that's polluting, we did pollute it with weed growth.
Okay.
But
well, you were part of your business, and I know you've said that the tannery was an economic boon to this area for a lot of reasons. But what did you know about other chemical companies coming in that time? Did you see or hear from anybody about the incoming DuPont or
I don't think
Hooker
there's
Chemical?
anybody knew that until all of a sudden this chap found out that Hooker was looking for a place where they could have a salt supply and wanted to come to Whitehall. And of course, DuPont, when they came, they could get stuff from Hooker for some of the stuff that they wanted. So,
and they both came about the same time,
right?
Yeah. So, what were your thoughts about them coming into the area?
Well, I don't know. We lost some employees that went to Hooker and DuPont because they could receive higher pay. But when any one of them came into me, when I was running the hiring end of the tannery, I said, if you can make better wages somewhere else, go.
And so you lost some. Well, what besides some employees leaving, what were some of the other changes that you saw happening as a result of these chemical companies? Either positive or negative.
Well, of course, I associated with some of the people from Hooker's, and I realized in talking to them that they were polluting the lake. Fish were dying where DuPont was running their effluent into White Lake.
So you did know about it.
I did. Winton Dahlstrom, of course, we had dealings with Winton on polluting White Lake, and he and another chap from Montague knew very well that Hooker and DuPont were polluting the lake, and they were after them too. So I knew that they were in trouble.
Did you think it affected the tannery business at all?
No, I don't think it affected us because, as I said, the only thing we were doing to the lake was contributing to weed growth, and it wasn't. They proclaimed that we were doing a lot of other things that were not so.
Well, when you started hearing about the pollution that came from the other chemical companies, did you take any action?
There was really nothing that I could do. I my own job kept me busy, and I couldn't be interested in somebody else's problems.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have any family members or friends who worked in the area that ended up being responsible for that pollution? You talked about one gentleman that you knew at Hooker. What was his name?
Well, whether he was responsible for it or not, I wouldn't say that, but he knew about it, and whether it was under his job, part of the operation or not, I don't know that.
Okay. Were you aware of any local protests about the pollution?
Yes, we were called into being by the City Council of Whitehall. And of course, I invited them to send the whole council down and go through the tannery, I would be glad to show them that we weren't, that we were taking care of the trimmings and so forth, that we were putting in gondolas and covering with lime and shipping them out to Peter Cooper Corporation. And I showed them the things that we were doing to curtail anything going into the pond that we could keep out. We bought a great big cylinder with tiny holes in it, about the size of my little finger, that kept all the stuff, if there was any excess stuff that was in the effluent that was that we could catch. Mm-hmm. We had a brush on the outside that would wipe it off and put it into a container. But I don't know. Of course.
Well, what did you think about those protesters, the ones that were protesting against the
tell you,
chemical companies?
I did not discuss the tannery at all with any of them. If they wanted to protest to me, I listened, but I never answered any questions.
Okay.
I knew what we were doing, yeah. And I figured if I talked to them, it wouldn't do any good anyway, because they wouldn't believe me. But we had a meeting down at the Mouse School.
Oh, really?
We had Sylvan Beach people were complaining that we were polluting the lake. And so I went down there and I spent a couple, 3 hours, and I said, "You're all invited to come up and we'll take you through the tannery." Everything was wide open for them. We never tried to cover up anything for them. When the ponds got out of kilter, with the pH got out, we spent something like $40,000 to buy fans to put in to get more oxygen into the ponds.
You know, I just would like to hear your reaction to those protesters that were protesting against DuPont and Hooker. If you had any thoughts about that?
No, I never discussed any other plants, except when they said something to me, I said they probably got problems too.
Okay. Did you understand what was happening, though, in the lake from the companies that were out here?
Well, the only thing I knew was a good friend of mine that was a fisherman, when he fished over by Hookers, after Hookers started putting pollution into the White Lake, the fish were dying off real fast, and so he quit fishing on that side of the lake because the fish were dying too fast over there. So he says, of course, he is the father of my son-in-law, so I got that information from him. You know.
Did you know of the efforts that were going on to clean it?
Well, all I knew was that Wynton Dahlstrom and his friend in Montague were pushing to have things done to clean up, but I don't know as any action was taken at that time to get them to do anything about it.
Yeah, we're talking about the 70s,
right.
The 80s. If you pushed ahead another 10 years, did you know about those efforts that happened later?
I'm afraid not.
Well, you know, speaking of your part here as just a resident, what do you think of White Lake's health at this time?
Well, they've been doing so much effort of trying to clean up White Lake that I'm sure you know, if you look hard enough, you'll always find some more things that need doing to make things perfect. And I'm sure that they've spent a lot of money and a lot of time in cleaning up the shores of the lake. And of course, they've spent money over on the Tannery with dredging out the ground work that some stuff may have been spilled on, you know. It's just like going to the doctor. You go to the doctor and he's always going to find something wrong with you. I don't care. And people are going to look at the lake and they're always going to think that there's something else that needs taken care of. I don't know. I've said that many times. You got to have fellows like Winton Dahlstrom in there fighting, because there's always going to be something they're going to find.
Yeah. A couple final sort of questions. What do you envision as this community's greatest needs in relation to protecting the environment?
Well,
What do you think the needs are?
you know, the Tannery got blamed for a lot more of the pollution than we were putting in. The people up the river were spreading fertilizer on the celery beds and so forth. It all came down on that side. And if you look in between the period in there, you'll see some of the results of some of that fertilizer that has been coming down.
Yes.
And
The river.
of course, we were always getting the blame for it, but because the river flows down that way, you know.
Yeah.
So eventually some of that stuff came down.
And that's some of that overgrowth of the algae you see up in the
Right.
wetlands area, right?
Yeah.
And other plants too, yeah. Can you think of any actions that you think will be necessary in the future to protect the lake from becoming polluted again? Anything that...
Well, I think you've always got to be watchful of what you let into the community to get on the lake. The city of Whitehall let this chemical company come in from a while that started polluting right away. And I think you've got to be very watchful that you don't let something get started.
Yeah. What other thoughts do you have about this that you'd like to share with the community?
Well, personally, you know, I'd like to see White Lake be 100% usable. That's what we got it for, you know, and I would like to have it stay that way. But there's things that we can't control right now. There's the high and low spots in the lake. Water levels have gone down. Some of those things we have no control over. But I think we should try and have control over everything we can that will protect the lake from being polluted.
And whose responsibility do you think it is to protect the lake? Is it government? Is it business? Is it the citizens? You know, who should take responsibility for it?
Well, it seems to me there's always a watchful group or committee that's watching these things. And I think that they should be helped by citizens that show an interest in supporting them.
When you started at the Tannery, can you tell us just a little bit about what the Tannery did for the community? Tell us the positive about the Tannery.
Well, to begin with, when the Tannery came into the community, it furnished jobs for about 175 people. And it also furnished taxes, about one half of the tax structure to the city of Whitehall. And then, of course, when Julian Hatton decided he was going to build a gymnasium a little bit south of the tannery with a lounge room in the front, it made a place for everybody in the area to come in and have dinners and have gatherings if their houses are too big for their own families. They furnish them with dishes, silverware, a stove, and a refrigerator. And of course there was toilet facilities on both ends of the building with lockers. So it was attached right to the gymnasium. And of course the gym was used by both Whitehall and Montague high schools for many years for their basketball games until the communities built their new gymnasiums, and the employees were able to go out there after work and play basketball, or they could go out there and play different games like ping pong and volleyball over the nets and so forth. It furnished, and I have some letters here from the Owassipee Boy Scouts. The leaders out there used the gymnasium all summer long, and they sent a letter of thanks, and a church, the White Lake Assembly of God, started their church in the Whitehall, in the Radcliffe room. They held their Sunday school at 10 a.m. and worship service at 11 a.m. until they were able to start their own church. And there was a letter from the Boy Scouts. We started holding dances, and there were very little places in this area for dancers. We had dances to begin with. We would have bingo. We'd 10 games of bingo in which we'd give away either turkeys or ham.
Wow.
And then we'd clear the tables and have a dance. We had Frank Lockage's orchestra for one. He'd bring a 9-piece orchestra up here for $50.
Wow. 9 pieces.
Yeah.
What about your orchestra? Did you play too at the Tannery?
We did play there a few times, but not for the big dances like that.
Tell us the name of your orchestra.
Junior Kings. He's the one that handled all the paperwork.
Okay. And what was his relation to you?
What?
Junior was who?
My brother.
Your brother. Okay. Got to get that on historical record, you know.
Yeah.
And who else was in the band?
His wife, and Paul Jensen, and Norm Clunder from Muskegon, and myself. There was 5 of us. Junior played drum, his wife played the piano, and then we had two saxophones and 1 trumpet. But
that's important historical fact.
We had an awfully lot of fun.
Yeah. So in a sense, we could say that the Tannery brought entertainment to the White Lake area too.
Right. And
benefit.
Of course there's many other things that the Tannery gave the kids on Saturday Saturday and sometimes on Sunday around the Tannery gym would come in and ask for permission to come in and play on the Saturdays that I was working. So I'd go open the gym and let them in. And if they didn't have tennis shoes, they had to go barefoot because they couldn't scratch the floor up.
Right.
I said the Whitehall Montague high school teams used it for their basketball teams. We gave 200 feet to the Swenson's Park, and Swenson's gave 100 feet, and yet they called it Swenson's Park. Spoonis taught tap and ballet there on Saturdays, and George Morris was down there with the Boy Scouts once a week, and they used the Radcliffe room for meeting, and then they would use the gym to play basketball. Ruth Curdell used to bring her classes from school down. And Roy Radcliffe says, "Oh, those kids, they don't get anything out of this. You're just wasting your time." But these kids went back to school, and she made them draw what they saw in the tannery. And you'd be surprised what they saw. I took it into Roy Radcliffe and put it on his desk and said, "Here, Mr. Radcliffe, is a result of the kids coming in and learning about leather."
Oh, that's interesting.
Lynn Snyder's group put in the Nutcracker Suite in the gym.
You mean they performed there?
Yeah.
Was there a stage in the gym? Like, where
Well,
they performed?
they put up a stage for the bands on Saturday nights.
Wow. That's
And of course they
fascinating.
put in our loudspeaking system in there. We used to get 200 and 300 people in there on dance nights.
Wow. That's a lot of people for
Yeah.
a little town.
And there's a lot of people that remember that, you know.
Yeah.
And of course there was so many people that used the Radcliffe room for get-togethers, for parties and so forth. All they had to do was ask and get it on the record, and they were allowed to come in. There was tables and chairs and dishes and everything for them. So I think the tannery did an awful lot of good for the community. I do. A lot that they never got credit for. The only thing that they remembered of the tannery, it stinks. Well, I remember when I
remember about them.
was a boy and went down by the tannery to go swimming down there by the Eagles, where the Eagles are now. I thought, how can anybody work in that place? And there I was in there for 43 years.
Did you notice the smell when you went to work, or was it just
No.
notice it?
I guess I could go down and sit on the flushing pile and eat my lunch. I went there on July 7th, 1935, and started for 32 cents an hour. And then I worked there for 43 years.
And look at you, you're still healthy.
Yes.
It didn't pollute you.
No.
Good.
No. I enjoyed the employees I worked with. We had a good group of employees. When I went to Nashville, I'd tell them, "You have the best group of employees working for you at Whitehall Leather Company. They're as good as anything you have down here at Nashville, Tennessee." We did have good employees. One of my big objects was dealing with the union at contract time. I always hoped that we could settle a contract before it was time for them to go on strike. I always tried to tell them that I fought all the time for having the union get a fair share of what they were doing. But I don't think I ever accomplished it in full.
Do you think the employees were pretty much satisfied, though?
Well, I know that,
A lot of fights.
you know, I run into these union employees when we were playing for dances out at the VFW in Montague, and the head of the bargaining committee come up and say, Dexter, there's one thing I want you to know. We always thought you were fair with us. Of course, I could only do so much in dealing with Nashville. In the end, they made the decisions. I went down there one time and told my boss I wanted 10 cents an hour for day workers because the spread between day workers and piece workers was getting too wide. And of course they brought in some of the brass that their job of handling the dealings of contract. And they said, no way. The time to talk about that 10 cents is in June. That's when your contract comes up. I said, absolutely not. We recognize it now, and I want 10 cents an hour immediately. Well, they said, you're going to have to wait till contract time, and they got up and walked out. So I said to them, my boss said to me, what do you want to do now, Dexter? I said, I want 10 cents an hour, and I want it right now. He said, you know, Dexter, I'm going to give you that 10 cents an hour, but I'm going to hold you responsible when it comes time for that contract. And I said, I'll tell you. When it comes time for that contract, and you tell me what you can give these employees, I will stay there and fight, but I want you to give what you can afford to give, not what you think you can get by with. Did you know why the tannery came to White Lake?
No. Tell us.
The tannery came here in 1847 and came here because there was plenty of water and plenty of hemlock bark. And it was a bark tannery.
Used it in the processing of the hides.
I got some of that bark on my walls in the basement.
Oh. How did that work? Tell us what the process was for
What?
using the bark to tan the hides. What does it do? The science of it, I guess.
They took the tan, after it was brought in, we took it in and ground it up.
The bark.
Ground the bark up and put it in vats that were about 10, 12 feet high and about 12 feet around. And then they put boiling water on it to get the chrome liquor out of the bark.
Is that an acid?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that acid helps soften the leather, right?
Well,
Kind of breaks it down a little bit and softens it.
I don't know, but it tans it.
That's what I need to know. Like, what is tanning exactly? What does that mean? I always thought it was like softening it, especially in the case of, cowhide.
Well, part of that softening comes later on when they put oils.
Oh.
When they put it in the fat liquor department,
Oh. Okay, so that wasn't just the hemlock bark, then that was another process
Right.
to soften it. Oh. Huh.
Of course,
It's a fascinating process.
they took the hides in the hidehouse and they opened them up, and of course they had a lot of manure on them. So the next job was to take them in and put them in floor vats and wash them.
Oh, right.
And then they had to pull them out of there and take them over to the machine that took the excess fat off it. And then from there, they went into vats on the floor that had lime, and then they run them through after they pulled them out of the vats, the hair had to get the hair off them, so they run them through a herring machine.
Oh.
And then after that, they put them in with acid and salt.
Wow. That's quite a process.
Yeah.
And they come out all beautiful and tan and brown and...
I worked in all those positions, you know,
Uh-huh.
all those jobs.
Yeah, so you knew a lot. Well, Dexter, I think, you know, you've really given us a lot of information to think about here. We need to kind of wrap it up. But is there anything that you'd like to conclude with this interview?
Well, between you and me, I am happy that the tannery is no longer in existence, because now all these people don't have anything to cry about.
Oh. So you're feeling, tell me if I'm wrong, but you're feeling a little bit disappointed that people criticize the tannery so
As much as they did.
Uh-huh.
I don't say that we were harmless. No, I didn't say that.
Uh-huh.
But
not as harmful as people
No.
accused you of.
no. We did throw tan leather that was trimmed off. We baled it and put it in the lake to protect our settling ponds from washing out.
Oh.
But you can take a shoe that's tanned and throw it in the lake. It won't pollute it.
Yeah.
I didn't go to any of these meetings where they were having meetings on pollution, because I didn't want to get up and argue with people. I knew, I worked there, I know what was happening. And no use of me arguing when they told me we were throwing stuff in there, rotten leather and so forth. We didn't do any such thing. I did say that we polluted the lake with running this fertilizer that we couldn't get out, that run out in liquid. There's nothing I could do about that.
Right.
You know, I went to the committee at the Lebanon Lutheran Church. Well, they wanted me to come down and tell them some of the things that the tannery had done for the community. So that's what I did. I wrote it down,
Okay.
and I thanked them for inviting me to come down there and talk to them. And we made some beautiful leather. We made a red book binding leather that is binding a lot of the books at Washington, D.C.
Oh, it's a
Well,
list of-
no, we made bag, case, wristwatch strap, billfold leathers. We also made some shoe leathers with the bark tanning, but shoe leather was soak up, where tanning with chrome wouldn't do that. And so when Genesco bought the plant in 1944, they changed everything from bark leather to chrome leather. And that's what most of your shoes are made of, chrome.
Yeah, what happened to the supply of hemlock bark? Did
It kind of
Run out?
petered out as the lumbering went out,
the trees went out? Huh?
and so they were happy when they sold the tannery to Genesco. They made a lot of changes. We used to take the bark after they got the liquor out of it and take it over and burn it on the. That's where we got the heat from. And they changed that to gas-powered instead of coal. But my friend Wesley Scott tells me that he got a letter from Nashville, I think he said it was Nashville, that said when the tannery quit running their effluent into White Lake, that they helped. That the effluent that they'd been putting in had helped do something. I don't remember what. I'm going to have to ask him sometime. Next time I see Scotty. They were sorry that the tannery had quit that and run their effluent into the wastewater system.
Just a quick informational question. How many people are still in this area that worked at the tannery when you were there?
Oh gosh, I wouldn't know.
Are there very many people?
I wouldn't have any idea. But you know, during the Depression in the 30s, Bill Hatton kept the tannery operating even though they weren't selling their hides, and they had the maximum of 325 employees at that time.
And they kept them on the job?
Kept them all the time and piled the leather up on the 5th floor. And that's where I first went to work when I went to work at the tannery. Went up and worked with John Blake, taking those hides and cutting them in two and sorting them for Huaracha hide or bag leather. So the tannery isn't all bad, you know.
You think it thrived because of the tannery, the White Lake area?
Well, of course, you know, the tannery was the only big plant to get a job from.
Yeah, 300 and some employees, that's pretty
For
large.
years, there was no other job before DuPont and Hooker and then the one we got now. I don't think the tannery affected the lake as much as they say it did. I know they didn't like the weed growth. I know that because they wanted boating. But I just don't think that the tannery affected the lake as much. No.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.